I believe we are on the show. Okie doke. Let's get our light bulb going. Welcome to September 8th, 2025. Ongoing Year of Doom 2025. And remember, tortuganwordpress.com, all of that stuff. Freebie. Away we go. Well, okay, boy. Sorry about a little bit late, but it was a busy day today, including having to do some yard work in waiting until the temperature cooled down enough so I could go out and do some mowing and weed pulling and limb trimming, etc., so on and so forth. Isn't that exciting? Anyway, as you know, we have been going through with monotonous boredom Titans, the creationist dinosaur book from 2022 that I picked up at a little creationist coffee clatch that CMI was having over in Idaho back in 2022. And it seemed a perfectly appropriate thing. Hello, Lisa. A perfectly appropriate thing to do to go through and do a full source analysis, because this was yet another one of those not uncommon creationist works where you don't really know what they've cited because there's no reference bibliography. They've cited sources in footnotes, but not otherwise. Just got out, oh, well, hope you are much better, Lisa. Casey Luskin bi-weekly thing, and we get to have some really cute little stuff on one of the little ALUs that connects up with the brain, which maybe they shouldn't have brought this little thing up, but we will be getting to that. So first order of business has to do with a particular paper by, and I'm going to probably slaughter the name, Moczydlowska et al. 2014, which is about this Ediacaran tube worm that they found in a beautiful state of preservation, and they were able to infer oodles about it as a living organism. But a whole pile up of creationists, including Sarfati and Tay, misunderstand or willfully misrepresent the content by implying that the flexibility that they're talking about was that soft tissues had been preserved that were still flexible. Nope, that wasn't what the paper was about. Nothing in the fossil was like that. And it turned out that a whole slew of creationists have been making that same mistake. And we're going to be going into it in a great deal in the appropriate chapter in volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, because we're going to be having a fairly comprehensive analysis of all of the various soft tissue claims. Brian Thomas is one of the really big offenders here, and his stuff has cascaded through all of this stuff. And Sarfati and Tay are just kind of repeating stuff in the periphery. But anyway, we'll be putting the link to that whole paper up in its full glorious glory. It's fascinating work on a fascinating little critter. But you can look through there, as far as I can see, diddly squat about actually preserved soft tissues. Only inferences that actually, because of the fact that it had been deformed in the process of fossilization in the early stages, that it was squishy enough as a living organism that it must have been, the tube must have been flexible when it was alive. That's all they were saying. So it's really kind of creationists misunderstand, color me shocked. Yes, indeed. This is like the most boring contextual thing that you can ever see. The constant observation of creationists doing the same bad method over and over and over and over again, which is a pattern that is giving us a clue as to how their brains inside could actually be making the point of view that they do. It's because they don't think about things they don't want to think about, and that other areas they can be making mistakes on, and we find that popping up in the Trump administration with RFK Jr. He's as much of a Tortugan mind as Sarfati and Tay are over in creationism. They do not know how to properly source fact-check material. They don't even realize they need to, and or they don't know how to do that if pressed, which is why one of the little soapboxes I get on, can't reporters start asking source methods questions? The easiest thing they could do, the quickest response would be that they will go for rump. Donald Trump will do that whenever anybody tries to quiz him on his claims, and he just gets all harumphy about it, which he's perfectly in a right to do as a sociopathic, pathological, convicted felon, numbskull who happens to be president of the United States. Don't blame me. I voted for Harris. Anyway, now we move on to our second part, which is our ongoing Luskin list. As you may have recalled, over the many weeks before, blue states sued for their funds and got them. Yeah, that's we've got a lot of fun material. I'm happy to see that my state has joined with California, Oregon, and now Hawaii to do a consortium that we're going to basically be making our own health vaccination policy, bypassing the federal government. Because, oops, RFK is a nincompoop. And so long as they're in power to be able to make idiot recommendations, nothing that comes out of the CDC and that for the duration can be regarded as reliable. They might accidentally hit some. You can't trust them. So we're going to have to go separately. And our states over here are not dumb. And we have not dumb governors, and we have not dumb senators. And so we are going to be doing not dumb things here. Thank you very much. Because we don't want to drop dead just because of the monumental stupidity of 77 million people who voted the God King Emperor into power. Anyway, back to Luskin. I have alluded to in previous episodes about the fact that one area where ALUs have definitely inveigled their way and become kind of functional is in brain chemistry. And one of those happens to involve BC200, which is a ribonuclear protein that has a portion of it composed of an ALU element. And Luskin was happy, or whoever compiled all the list was delighted with that, because he's got 4 papers in there relating to this. There's one, the oldest, is the Scriabin et al. 1998, that I'll be able to put the link up to that, on the prevalence of this gene in neural expression among primates, not just human beings. That is a dead giveaway that we have an evolutionary background to all of this stuff. Secretary of HAC should be an MD or PhD. I would agree. He should also not be an idiot. And I'm afraid RFK fails in being a doctor, but does not fail in being an idiot. And overall, the Trump administration is just taken the top spot with no close second contender as the most incompetent top-level cabinet post officials of any administration in the entire history of the Republic. That's going some. There have been ups and downs, but never has there been one where basically it's difficult to find a non-nincompoop in these positions. It's basically Fox News punditry, people that praise Donald Trump and whoop, slides him into a cabinet post. So it's predictable, not unexpected, revolting, disgraceful, and we're going to be paying a lot of price for that up and down and in and out in the next few years. But anyway, that's my other little soapbox that I will be banging on quite a lot, because things are going to be very interesting over the next few years. Anyway, back to our ALUs. So that Scriabin paper is the oldest one. And it's a work that's laying out its involvement in the brains of primates, so early in the lineage. Then there's a paper from 2020 that I'll also be putting a link up to, that we're finding a mixed bag as to whether these ALU-rich domains were enhancing or suppressing activity. We weren't entirely sure what it was doing. And that's a theme explored at greater length by 2 papers from Bowie et al. 2018 and 2020 that I'll also be putting a link up to, which the latter is studying its activity explicitly in tumor cells. So clearly we're bumping into a theodicy snag here, and we've been running easily about a third of the papers that has been cited so far bump into that element. The latter paper is suggesting that BC200 can act as a translation stimulant rather than just as a repressor, as had previously been thought. And that They also reminded their readers how difficult it is to tease out if ALUs are actually doing anything directly, or they're just present because they're relentless hitchhikers, and so they're all around things that actually do something. Don't hold your breath that any idea is ever going to wonder whether there might be a design defect to those little ALUs that are figuring in misregulation regarding to cancers. So, turns out references had more on BC200 than just what was in the Luskin list. And so I'm going to be putting some material up on there as well. Martinetti and Brosius, 1993, and Brosius was a co-author on that Scriabin paper, by the way. That was a very early identifier of the protein itself, and this very informative summary that I shall be reading to you in my usual dulcet tones. Quote, the BC200 RNA gene is an early monomeric member and one of the few postulated transcriptionally active ALU sequences in this family, note few postulated, in this family of nearly 500,000 retropositionally amplified elements dispersed throughout the human genome. Furthermore, the isolation of two pseudogenes, BC200 beta and BC200 gamma, demonstrates the gene's transpositional ability. Interestingly, the BC200 beta pseudogene may have been generated by a conversion-like event after the human-chimpanzee divergence, resulting in an exchange of the left arm of a dimeric ALU element with the BC200 RNA coding sequence. Our data on conserved features of the active BC200 alpha gene suggests that its RNA product has been exapted into a function of the primate brain and provides a selective advantage to the species. So there we have laying out a clear indicator of what the dynamics of ALUs are. I couldn't have worded it better myself. That's why I decided to read it to you. And one will notice that paper is not on the Luskin list. Now, Scriabin was also among the co-authors of some other stuff that I had in my field. Kuryshev et al. 2001. I'll be able to give you, but I will be able to give to an extended abstract at Science Direct that'll give a lot of the material on it. Anyway, it's about its origination in primates and its subsequent variations in the varying lineages spreading out of that over the last 35 to 55 million years. So all of this is not helping the non-common descent intelligent design case. It's not helping the argument that any of these ALUs were deliberately designed to be where they are. It was not helping the idea that natural exaptation processes are not actually doing things inside of our genome. So this ticks off a whole bunch of boxes all on its own. And I'm not sure that the people who put those 4 papers on the list realized any of this. The Kuryshev paper also is not one on the Luskin list. It's not all nice with BC200. So remember, it appears elevated in some cancers. There's a paper from 2017 from Kim et al. I'll be putting a link up to that. And yet another one from Bowie et al., this one from 2017. It was delving into how this ALU BC200 is, quote, critical for cancer cell survival and proliferation, unquote, which therefore was bringing up the whole issue about whether or not you could target therapy in this area by shutting down BC200 because its expression is helping to proliferate cancer cells. More papers that did not make it onto the Luskin list. Are we getting a pattern here, kids? We have this wonderful dynamic of once in a while, the Luskin list, as we've already documented in a third of the cases, are stuff that's directly tripping into the idiocy issue and has information that is not really helpful of their case. But here is one that really gets to the core of how useless the intelligent design argument is on this matter and how informative the regular science papers are. That's why I love linking to them. So far, we've been fairly good on being able to get the original primary sources on this stuff. And I have laid down the gauntlet. I am predicting that when we have plowed through, and it's going to take a while, kids, all of these papers, that this situation that we've already laid out won't be any different than it was at the start. namely that the vast majority of retrotransposons and air quotes junk DNA are actually still junk DNA, and that the numbers of ones that can be seen to be doing something is well within the parameters that Dan Stern-Cardinale laid out in his debate with Luskin, and moreover, that the details of all of those papers make sense within an evolutionary common descent framework, and nothing of note of value is being contributed by the harumphs of this non-annotated vomit of 800 plus sources. Plus, at least I'll also have an actual number of how many actual sources there are on it. There are one or two at least double dips where the same paper is actually showing up multiple times on the list, but I'll have a master listing. So we'll find out if it is actually 800 papers or not, and a complete breakdown. The vast majority of them fall into the ALU retrotransposon mode. There are a few other little subcategories farther down the road, and exactly how much of those are, we'll get a grip on as we plow through them all. That'll keep us busy. What do you think? So we're about 15 minutes in. Let me give a big thank you shout out to our patrons who, despite thick and thin, up or down, in and out in our very unsettled 2025, have stuck with the old RJ. And that means I get a little trickle of money every month that helps make things ever so much better in the tough times of getting by one day at a time, 1 week at a time, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, thank you all of our colleagues and researchers and assistant researchers and friends and legacy patrons, despite the fact that the word processor document that I put up here displays weirdly because of some foible in the way Microsoft Word is operating on my little laptop here. So such is life. Anyway, one of the things I was doing just today also slowed me down on things is finishing up the section on magnetic fields in the cosmology chapter for the new book. It's one of the things that really surprised me how persistent and stupid it is, because it all devolves essentially to just two people. Barnes back in the 1980s, and he died around 2001. And then mainly the ball carrier here is Russell Humphreys, who has just been banging this drum that, oh, he has predicted Mercury's magnetic field and why planets do or do not have magnetic fields. And this is a thing that gets troped in a lot of the secondary bits where they basically rely on Humphreys. And so you get stuff at ICR, CMI, and various videos that just run amok with the guy. Outside of this little creationist niche, people really aren't paying any attention to it at all. And from my perspective, I regard this whole magnetic field matter as really peripheral, because Humphreys's big deal whack-a-loonery is coming up regarding the attempts to get around the day 4. How can we see distant objects? What's the size of the universe? What's the nature of space-time? That has to be manhandled in order to make it fit. And it's one of half a dozen different rationalization dodges or rescue devices, to borrow Standing for Truth's little bit, that cover pretty much their field. And then a little pimple on the back ass of that are the little old Earth creationists who generally shy away from the topic much. And as we'll be showing here, there's a good reason why they would want to do that, because it's also a problem, the day 4 issue, for them, for a different set of reasons than what happens with the young Earth creationists. And here, John Lennox turns out to be an offender. He skirts around this issue very, very tiptoey in various books that he's done. And as far as I know, he doesn't bring it up at all in any of the various debates and things that he pops up on where he looks all avuncular and charming. I think, whoops, it says, oops, connection lost. No, the timer is still running. There may be a slight, come. Okay, the timer's still running. I'm not sure whether we're coming through on your end, but my counter is still advancing. So I'm assuming, kind of, sort of, I'm still here. Let me go ahead and put my advert for the book while we're running. See what is happening. Let us see where we are. And counter's still running, even though it's got an oops, connection lost, reconnecting. So I really don't know Let me type the thing here and. Yep, I'm getting a thing popping up on the doodad, so I'm unclear. At any rate, we will put our little window up here and let ourselves run. And if we're on, we're on. And if not, we're not. And then we'll find out whether or not things are still running. Counter is still running. Yay! Yeah. Sometimes I can't be sure about what's popping up on terms of what's seen on the screen. And of course, sometimes I can be roboting or it can come across glitchy on the other screen independent of that. You freebie on the YouTube, you buys your ticket without many money and you takes your chance. There we go. Anyway, the cosmology chapter then will be spilling into another area that although the magnetic field thing is a weirdly persistent topic, the one that is obsessively persistent is the comets and asteroid stuff, because boy, creationists are desperate. That's one of the reasons why the magnetic field thing is still kind of peripheral, because the argument is Russell Humphreys trying to argue, he's finally come to accept that magnetic reversals happen. The earlier branch, Barnes and Company, didn't even believe that. But he's like Jensen and that, cramming all the genes into the post-flood period. He's assuming that all of the geomagnetic reversals took within the flood time. And in fact, cycling back and forth in the matter of like hours, which is hilarious. It is presumably persuaded absolutely nobody in the regular scientific community on that front. Well, if you can argue that the Earth has to be young because of magnetic field decay and all of these magnetic reversals are actually a part of the recent Earth, it's the same class of things as people who are trying to argue that if you can show that a comet wouldn't last for billions of years and therefore the universe has to be much younger, as though every comet and everything is formed only in the beginning of the solar system and gets into position. Like one of the reasons why we get into the bit with the Kuiper belt and then the Oort cloud is that an awful lot of the gunk that ends up as comets and to some extent even asteroids are way out past Pluto and get occasionally nudged in place by passing stars or the gravitational tugging of relentless things like the sun itself or Jupiter. And little things can occasionally get nudged in and kaboom, a comet that would sit out there forever as a big rocky ice ball will start deteriorating once it gets close enough to get into the sun where it can burn off. Likewise, Saturn's rings, I don't think any cosmologist argues that they were there when the planet was formed. They're relatively recent phenomenon. Our planet apparently had a little ring during the Ordovician. So there we go on there. Yes, they don't question what designer puts the breathing tube next to the swallowing tube. Yeah. Yes, I've always, or the one that says that it puts an amusement park next to the garbage disposal, which is another point about what's going on with the way our genitalia are laid out. It's a very peculiar design. But remember, your average creationist is never going to want to thought I had that there, and is that going to be Can't seem to see a point about, whoops, how to get rid of that little message there. Oh, well. Trying to scroll up and down on my little thing, but yep, I got me listed on a show, but yet it's still popping up on the screen, so I really don't know what the. Boop. Yep, not sure why that's still up on the screen. So it's the peculiarity of the gods. Not that I have any mind about Lisa for Truth being up there. That's perfectly fine. That sums up in a nutshell a lot of the problems. Intelligent designers and young earth creationists, the whole creationist community, really is uncomfortable with the idea of weird shit going on in our biology. So they love to point out the pretty things and the nice, wonderful things and the fabulously complex and the knife edge of perfection and all of that, and generally bypass the creepy, weird parts where if you're a young earth creationist, you just slough it off as the fall. And if you're an intelligent design person of the Luskin stripe, you just don't think about it at all. There we go. The thing finally disappeared. So I guess we're getting a really slow response time on that little thing. So we've got that as a fundamental structural problem in the whole. Get some more down in here. Don't they understand they get all species, they have to accept hyperevolution? Oh yeah, that's there's a variety of things that are popping up as leitmotifs in the new book. One, of course, is the hyperspeciation issue. One of them involves the rearranging for some creationists where the flood boundary is, the acceptance of plate tectonics, the acceptance of geomagnetic reversals. You've got a whole bunch of these things where the science has advanced to the point where the creationists can't even deny the data field. So somehow or other, they got to rearrange it and get it shuffled into fit. Never mind that to squish things into too tight of a time frame means you're having heat problems and sequential problems. Hyperspeciation involves speciation rates and mutation factors that are just shoot off the index. They're way higher than anything that we can see either in living organisms or sustainable in living organisms. And Dan Stern-Cardinale has pointed out, how there's lots of different technical studies that absolutely rule out that level of hyperspeciation, rapid mutation bit. Somebody like Standing for Truth can burble on about created heterozygosity, and it floats around as kind of a mantra where in Nathaniel Jensen and that crowd, where theoretically Adam and Eve and or descendants, Noah and the kids, have a deliberate heterozygosity in their genome sufficient to be able to account for all of the observable haplotypes and variations that we can see in their immediate descendants. You don't get this problem when you're looking at intelligent design or old earth creationists because they don't have the bottleneck of the flood and the creation week to account for, so they just don't think about it. Generally speaking, there aren't really any heavy gun geneticists on the old earth creationist side, your Fazal Rana crowd. And there aren't really any counterparts of that in the intelligent design movement. You've got some biochemists, Michael Behe and Michael Denton, but not really people tied in genetics. Closest you might come is Richard Buggs, the plant geneticist, but he hasn't even made the kinds of extremist claims that would need to be the case with the intelligent design stuff. Created heterozygosity. Let me type that one in there. That's, I believe, our spelling. Heterozygosity simply involves the amount of allele variations and things you get in a genome, so that you've got a lot of different variation clusters that in recombination can get shuffled around. And I'm getting a little oops, something went wrong, reloading page. My counter's still running, so I don't know what the hell's going on. And theoretically, you could have a genome that would have enough variety in it that could have extant organisms as their descendants. The problem is Is such an organism possible in a real context? And do we see the signs of that as any dynamic genetic analysis would indicate? And as Stern Cardinale and Zach Hancock and others would have indicated, nope, sorry, that won't cut it. So it's a term that kind of floats around, kind of like lithification for the geology crowd, of where they're implying that the slurry of the flood can turn into rock uber fast so that you can get the Grand Canyon cutting the rock very quickly afterwards. But they're not really going out of their way to work out how the hell that happens or justify it physically. So Adam and Eve had a larger genome. Yeah. Oh, how would that work? It wouldn't. And the killer question that I ask creationists when this pops up is, how many ALUs did Adam and Eve have? The very topic that we have been discussing. And did they have a BC200 or not? Did they have a functional genes that the ALUs have shut off that generate the tails? What exactly was the genome? Now, the fact that young Earth creationists are in the terrible mess here, because everything is so recent that theoretically you could calculate what that genome ought to be like, in the same way that I think an odd little species of plant was found down in Central America, I think. And they were wondering where it had come from, and they were able to genome type it, and they had the genome of another one that looked like a hybrid of this thing, which meant they now knew the genome of the other hybrid. And eventually, I think they were even able to find what that was. So they were able to identify both ends of this hybridization event that generated this particular plant. Well, this is what you'd have on steroids with all, not just Adam and Eve. Every critter on the ark is going to have this same issue. As far as I know, nobody in the intelligent design movement gets that deep into the weeds. They don't have the young Earth creationist frame to contend with, so they can have this kind of squishy no man's land of something happened in the genome. But it is revealing that so many of the examples that are brought up in the intelligent design movement are involving biological systems that aren't necessarily even human, and may involve, and often involve, issues that go back hundreds of millions, if not billions of years. Or in the case of this ALU thing in our brain, is connecting up to things that are tracking the last 50 million years of primate history. In other words, none of it is human specific. And if they tried to do that, they would now immediately face the problem that there's practically nothing in our biology that's human specific. We are the way we are because we have weird little modifications, little regulatory shifts here, little neotenous delay points there, and so forth, in already existing biology. So we're a neotenous ape that has some very interesting language features that have cascaded into a variety of cultures, including storytelling that makes up religions too. La-di-da. But no brain systems that we have are unique to us. You have to get way down into the little microweeds to find stuff that is kind of human species specific, but none of the big stuff. So it's going to be an interesting thing. Hope that explained a bit about what the heterozygosity term refers to. And yes, pterazygosity. I got a bit of a croup here from, there's been an awful lot of smoke in the area. Our air is finally starting to clear a bit, but there have been fires in the region, plus stuff that's bumped in from out in the beyond our area. So we've had a little bit of air quality issues, plus the heat. We've been pushing up to close to 100 at times. It's cooling off now into the 80s, and we're going to have a little spurt of nippy 70-degree weather for a few days, and then back up into the 80s by next week. So that's where we'll see where the hell we're going. Later in the month, you will see a different background because my birthday is coming up, and I'm going over for my annual birthday bash with my relatives in Seattle, and this way they can verify I'm still alive. And I'll be there for a couple of weeks, so you'll see, a different room, and then we'll get back into the bit. Yeah, there's smoke all over the place. The whole West has a hell of a lot of fires that are going on in California, and huge fires up in Canada. Terrible the stuff that's going on. And then, of course, you got your flooding issues and torrential rains and stuff. Isn't climate change that supposedly isn't happening wonderful? I can recommend a recent video. That was another thing I was doing over the weekend. Dave Farina just did a post going after Matt Ridley. I'll type his name in here. Matt Ridley is a Viscount or Viscount, as Farina may be deliberately mispronouncing him. But anyway, he's kind of a climate denier and a COVID anti-vaxxy kind of person, and thought that for a while there that the AIDS virus was caused from contaminated polio vaccine. I mean, he's just a laundry list of really sloppy, bad thinking. And Farina just lit into his recent material with a vengeance, with a detailed things. In fact, I spent one whole evening plugging in the vast amount of technical material that Dave had put up, of which only one or two ones were already in my reference field. The reason why I'm attending to that is that whole anti-vaxxer mythology is part of the issue about bad methods and the consequences of them. And that's going to be one of the topics of presumably the next book that Jackson and I will be doing once we finish Rock Was There, Volume 2. You mean the climate change that's not happening? Exactly. Yeah. And Ridley is showing all the stereotypical signs of a superficial secondary source addict. When he'll bring up technical material that when you look at the actual material, it doesn't say what he claims it does, or he's relying on a secondary account of the thing and he never bothered to fact check beyond that, or he's relying on older material that's been superseded. And even when he has been informed of more recent material, he hasn't changed his viewpoint. And he's very selective. He sort of accepts all sorts of the pieces of climate change, but then argues that it doesn't matter. So he's been goalpost moving as to how much climate temperature rise he is thinking is possible and how dangerous it might be. And when that level is actually now happening, he just kind of shunts it aside to where he'll discuss the temperature rise or the potential danger hazard and never connect the things together. So it's just a fabulous example of how a Tortugan mind wiffle waffles around subject matter, and it's like nailing Jello to a wall, which would be of the form that we saw with RFK Jr. being grilled in the hearing in the Senate over the weekend. Wow, even some of the stupid Republicans who voted for him are starting to get antsy about him. And RFK was just bluffing along, and Senator Warner, is Democrat, asked him point blank, do you agree that 1 million people died of COVID here in the United States? And my voice is almost getting to that gravelly mess that's RFK voice. But anyway, he was saying that, well, no one really knows that. No, you don't know it. And the reason why apparently he doesn't know it is because he doesn't think to look. He's only now head of the department. Why would he have access to information that even I and anybody else, because almost all of the COVID information is open access journals. Almost every paper that I've ever encountered in this has been public access, so anybody can download the full text. So the only excuse that RFK would have would be abject laziness or tortuganosity, where he ain't ever going to look into this and nothing is ever going to persuade him. Cranial blockage of the rectum, as an old college acting buddy once described it as many, many moons ago. You mean the class? Oh, I was well aware that was a joke. Yes, Lisa. Yes, it's a sad joke, and the joke's on us until we do things to change about it. But it's going to be an interesting few years to come to see what's going on. To some extent, some of the climate amelioration matters will be able to be screwed up by Trump 2.0, and others won't. in that the companies are going to be doing this whether Trump likes it or not, simply because the market and the world demands it. I can't imagine any major American car maker backing off of electric car production unless they plan on never being able to sell their product abroad, because that's the norm everywhere else, including competing with the Chinese, who are going hell-bent for leather into providing inexpensive electric vehicles that they will be happy to sell to the rest of the world if our product lines won't do that. Yes, that's a very good question. It's one of the reasons why the real science papers are very circumspect about attributing, for example, a particular hurricane to global warming. But you can look at larger trends and see whether or not the effects you're seeing are way more than you would have expected if there hadn't been a climate effect. Noah Diffenbaugh has done papers on that. I think I've alluded to it in various times in way episodes quite a ways back, on California drought cycles and the like, and how this stuff isn't natural. It's operating at a level that is uncharacteristically intense if climate change weren't happening. And you can get the same dynamic in regards to drought patterns in other areas of the country, El Nino effects, a lot of stuff that's going on. And you can also see it in migration of flora and fauna due to temperature. You can see it in water level, drainage systems, and the like. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on in there. One of the things that has been a dangerous problem with hurricanes, for example, is not that there are necessarily going to be more hurricanes or even bigger ones per se, but whether or not they are slowing down. They bring up so much water and slob across their target zone more slowly, therefore dropping more of their rain in big blobs rather than distributing it over a larger area, because the older hurricanes move faster. That's a variable that pops up. And so even though individual events as to like whether or not the temperature was 88 or 90 here in Spokane can't be fine-tuned, attributed to whether or not climate change is happening, nonetheless, the overall patterns, if anybody is as old a fart as I am, has experienced how climate is different than when it was when you were younger. I can literally see on my back, can measure for you the dynamic of how snowfall has shifted and how much per year on my driveway over the course of 50 years, because I've lived here that long. So everybody can have elements to these effects. And even places that don't think of themselves as climate-y, like Kansas, are still having to face the issues. Even if they don't want to use the terminology, farmers and others are desperately bumping into these dynamics. Drought cycles that are killing off crops too early, or rain cycles happening in the wrong time frame that's rotting out crops. Masses of cattle, the cattle industry, because they can't get the forage they need because they're running low on water. Our region here is having that effect, and there's quite a lot of others that are having the same problem, but it's affecting stuff in Washington State as well. So the only people who could say that the climate change is not having deleterious effects are people who suffer from cranial blockage of the rectum, and they are not looking at any of the data field. They're not getting out much, which, alas and alack, would probably include most everybody in Trump's cabinet. So there we are. So we've gotten past to 43 minutes. Paul Beckwith here on YouTube. Yeah. Hi, Brian. Yeah, my throat's all gucky guck. I duly apologize. Hopefully I will not be ever getting to the point of sounding like RFK Jr. That fellow is like nails across the blackboard, annoying. And that's independent of the claptrap that he's saying, that just adds to the mess of it. So anybody let's see. So we'll find out. I should be able to get that whole thing, including that BC200 RNA quote, into the video description. If it turns out to be a little bit long, then I'll have to trim the material down, but I'll definitely still keep all the sources. Sandy with the environmental coffee house, also worth time. Yeah, there's an awful lot of people out there. Plus, there's been several just deliciously effective posts on the reality of global warming and how the denialists are stupid, from Potholer 54. I've never seen a Potholer 54 video that was not just a cornucopia of meticulous source analysis. There's a whole bunch of people out there who, precisely because whether they think of it consciously this way or not, they're doing source methods analysis. They are deliberately looking into the sources that the idiot is relying on to examine whether or not they are fairly representing them or not, and moving beyond that to present the bigger field of information so that the reader listener does not have to rely upon anybody like us for our knowledge. Read the sources yourself. Don't take my word for it. I think I'm accurate enough. I don't think anybody's ever caught me on misrepresenting a source that I've ever put up, knock wood. And hopefully that will continue as time goes on. It's not that I'm infallible, but I try to correct mistakes and learn from them and revise because new material comes along. Issues about like how early the geodynamo took place on the planet, whether Mars once had a magnetic field bigger than it is now. There's a whole bunch of little things that are open issues in science, and we're going to be presenting the various pros and cons and ups and downs of them, and including long-standing squabbles over the impact scenario hypothesis for the Younger Dryas. That is an interesting analog as to how scientific issues can go on for a long time battling, and you can compare this to the fluff that goes on in the creationist community. So anyway, we will be plugging along in the heat. We got our fuel oil that's going to be delivered here at the house finally next week. That will at least put me above the too low level. So just in case we finally reach the point where I have to turn the furnace back on, I'm using it now currently as a pump to pump basement air up. And that has to be in a slightly different mode. There's a little switch you can turn on to do that. That helps ameliorate the heat here. So anyway, everybody stay super duper safe. Watch out for the wooden penguins, especially the ones with lasers. And we will be seeing you next week. And then probably beyond that, we'll have a different background because by then we'll be over in Seattle. That'll be, in fact, on my birthday, which is a Evolution Hour showtime. It's 22nd. So anyway, everybody stay safe, out of weather and mess, and try to avoid too many confrontations with our ice mess that's trying to invade various cities. So far, we haven't any sign that they're planning on coming into anywhere in our state. Yipes. All the dynamics, I think, will be changing by the time we get into the autumn, because I'm expecting a 1929 stock crash, and the economy collapsing will change the focus of the debate in Trump 2.0, I think, quite considerably. So till next time, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, aloha.